Hey, how's it going, guys? My name is John Park, and welcome to another session of tutorials. For today's lesson, basically what I'd like to show you guys is some painterly techniques. I guess one of the things that I like to kind of cover or go over before we get into the thick of the illustration is talking a little bit about the difference between making economical brush marks versus very specific brush marks. And the way I like to think about this is the difference between vague and specific. Now, when we look at something like this, we want to think about large versus small. But what I really want to pinpoint out is the difference between vague and specific, because we're going to make a lot of choices using a large brush stroke to basically convey a certain amount of resolution and detail. So if we look at like things that are completely out of focus, like if there's an object here and there's really large things in the background and foreground in it and stuff like that, even in the foreground there's probably something really big that's out of focus, but in the areas that there are lots of detail or it is in focus, then we start to basically communicate that by adding a lot of smaller brush strokes, and thus even building that by adding more smaller brush marks that basically tell us that, hey, this is the area that has the highest level of detail, therefore look here. So it's kind of like how camera works today, right? Things that are out of focus are going to be completely blurry, and things that are in focus are going to be extremely sharp. So that's kind of the way I'm going to be talking about brush economy. I know there's a lot of other principles of kind of gesture and things like that, but this is kind of the most simplistic way that I can kind of spell it out for you guys, and I hope that this makes sense. Please, if at any point I do a demo, I'd love to kind of hear your guys' thoughts. Alright, well, let's get started with the references. Well, first off, these are some references that I pulled just from the internet. I believe there's a website called armstreet.com. It has a lot of people in cosplay, more or less in terms of like the medieval kind of clothing, and there's a lot of images for LARPing. And LARPing is a really fun one because I find a lot of people getting really detailed in just a lot of cool, like Lord of the Rings kind of fantasy orcs and stuff like that, and they do a great job just kind of getting a lot of the materials to read. So what I like to do is just, even looking at something like this, one thing that I found very challenging but very useful is understanding the object and understanding what it is that we're painting. And so when we look at this is obviously a guy in a cloak, but what is going on with the forms, and how do we get it to have that painterly feel? Well, first off, let's just go ahead and try to emulate this feeling. But I'm going to start off with the background. And the background, I'm just going to basically put in a really simple just form right here. No detailing of the trees or anything just yet. I'm just going to think about nothing but the background here. We won't even put in the ground detail as well. We'll just keep it a simple background like this. The next thing I want to do is actually I want to try to get as much of the shape as best as possible. So I'm going to use maybe white just so I can see it. And we can even use like a hard brush, but I want to just kind of look at the silhouette. Now, this is not a mandatory or required thing in painting. I know a lot of guys who don't work this way, and they are still able to achieve just an amazing painterly quality. But starting out, I found this technique or method to be useful just so that we can control our edges. And that's something that I'd like to talk about in a minute. But I'm just going to get in some of these shapes here. Get in that hand. And just some little blips of detail. Okay. And something like that. So relatively simple, yet very clear silhouette of what we're looking at. So at this phase, what I would like to think about is getting the local color. And the local color is relatively not in the highlights, which is this value, but also not in the darks. So we can actually document that and say, okay, the highlight is that color, or I guess it's more or less that color. Our darkest darks on this is probably around that range, and our mid value is around that range. So I'm going to use that as kind of our local color base and just kind of block in the entire image here, the entire shape. Once I got that blocked in, it's very easy for me to then go in there and start blocking out some of the dark values. And I can do that by adding just some of the dark to start conveying some fold and stuff like that. I want to try to avoid doing any of the highlights and stuff like that, because it's something that I think we can save for the end. It's kind of the cherry on top. So I'm just going to try to simplify it, a lot of that stuff, and just only add our darks. And I'm only thinking about the shapes, nothing else, just our darks here. And I know there's a lot of things that are kind of intersecting and stuff like that, but I only want to focus purely on the shapes here, what's going on. And I guess we can almost kind of draw it out if it helps you guys to visualize. So if we have the hand here, and we basically have the arm, and I'm going to simplify it. And for those of you who are excellent figure drawers out there, I'm sure this is kind of like you guys are cringing right now. You're like, there's no straight lines in figure drawing, you know, or at least that's kind of one of the rules that my instructor would give me. But you know, this is just an easy way to kind of understand, like, okay, well, here's a fold, right? Here is a fold here. If I can get that fold, here's another fold, and here is another fold. You know, it's doing something like that. And here's another fold here. So all these little things are just kind of indicators that tell us, like, okay, what's happening with the clothing? You know, what are we actually looking at? And then stuff like this, like, okay, there's a fold here. Now, do I want to get some of the creases? Probably not. I'll let kind of my highlights do that. But this way, you know, we have some nice information regarding kind of the basic lines here, but also areas where we know for a fact that there are shadow. So I'm actually just going to simplify a lot of this stuff, and don't even worry about too much of the gradations, because we can actually probably bring that in, but just things that are very obvious, like dark areas. At this point, what I want to do is now I want to start introducing some of the midtones back, and we're probably going to use a large brush here with a little bit of value, with a little bit of a darker value range. And this is actually going to be something that I'm going to start thinking about, just some form. And this is, you'll see me, you know, making some broad strokes here just to get some of those forms to turn. definitely want to try to get that shape in there. And you'll notice that my rendition of it is quite simple. It's not like the most complex kind of rendering. I want to try to be as very vague with my forms in the very beginning phases, just because I want to make sure that all these forms read, and that's why I'm using. You'll notice I'm using a very broad brush. I'm trying to not get as specific too quickly. And even like the shading here, you know, we see almost kind of like a nice little shape, and you can almost kind of test it out, like, oh, this is kind of a shape like this, right? And I even sometimes draw on my actual reference just to kind of see what kind of shape is it that we're looking at. And these are some of the shadow shapes that give us these really nice indication of form and just how the structure of that looks. So I'm gonna follow that as best as I can in my drawing here to emulate the same patterns. Let's go a little bit darker. This is something that I love to have you guys just try out before we get into the rendering of it all, just because it helps to kind of think about, you know, these elements or these shapes and stuff like that before we start to get into a lot of the details. But you notice even that right here, it's conveying quite a bit of information, and it's working out in the most primitive kind of you know, visual. It's like we understand what we're seeing, right? So from here, now it's just kind of detail. Details are like all the little bits and all the highlights. So there's obviously a little bit more gradations. You know, we got like core shadows and cast shadows and stuff from the actual object. And I actually just kind of I literally color pick from this, because I mean, honestly, it's one of those things that if I can get the color from the photograph, it'll eliminate, you know, one less part of the thinking. Now, that's not, I don't want to preach and say, hey, this is the way to work, guys, but this is just one way to eliminate you know, thinking for a little bit, so we can just focus on the actual rendering of it all. I'm totally for, you know, learning all this stuff properly, but just for getting basic brush economy and stuff like that, I mean, it's okay. Okay, I'm gonna switch brushes here. Just kind of want that nice bit of kind of gradation here. Probably go back to my texture brush, something broad, just so that I can get some nice shapes and stuff like that. I'm just going to go a little bit darker here. Okay, now let's go ahead and just start Getting some of that extra color, some of that flesh color. Don't want to forget about that. And you'll see me just kind of doing a more simplified version of it, because it's always just a shape. Everything that we see is always going to start off as a shape, and then from there it's up to us to really fill in all the details. But for now, it's just a shape. Okay. And then now let's get some of the little stitching bits. For something like that, we'll switch to a brush that has a little bit more edge control. So something like along the lines of this here. And I'm going to use that just to kind of get some of my edge detail here. So I can just kind of plot that in. Get some of that there. Let's get some of the lines up here. And the thing is, guys, this is like, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to convey just the right amount, because that's kind of the beauty of this, is that you kind of want to bank off of that. The interpretive look of it. So if something looks better just broad and simple like that, you know, it's probably best to leave it. Okay, let's go ahead and save. Alright, now what I want to do is probably start getting some of the highlights in. Now this is where we're going to start playing with a lot of the highlight values here. So this is kind of grouped here. It was a similar value. It's a little bit dark. This is obviously a little bit darker, but I want to start playing with a little bit of those highlight values to start punching out some of the details here. And also keep in mind, we can use some of the darker values here to start refining the edge. But these highlight values is what's going to help kind of give that nice form that we need. So again, using my broad brush here, probably gonna give it a nice gradation, broad strokes here. And if you can do it in one or two marks, that's fantastic. If it takes you a little bit more, then you know, no worries there. It's always fun doing this kind of stuff, because I find it that like it's something that you can probably do as you're watching a movie on the side, or you know, hanging out with your friends and stuff like that, because it's just kind of observational studies, and these observational studies, you know, don't really require too much like hardcore concentration. It just requires a lot of, you know, slowing down and patience. You know, so definitely have fun with these for sure. And use my little smudge brush here to kind of get a soft edge. But even that right there starts to really help. And use the broad side of this brush and just kind of make an indication of that kind of going down. And I don't want to do any more to it, because the more I do to it, then it starts to lose its painterliness. It starts to get very, very tight. Okay, go in here with some of the subtle details. Now you'll find that I'm kind of hatching diagonally. It's because I just want to give the illusion of some patterning here, or not patterning, but just some direction instead of painting downward all the time. This just helps it a little bit dark value there. And then we're going to get some of those nice little creases here that we see. And we're going to make those same marks right here, these little pinches here. Just trying to indicate that with 1 or 2 strokes. Okay, let's go back to our highlight. Now, I know for some of you guys, you're thinking like, man, this is a lot of prep work just to kind of get a painting started. It is only in the very beginning, because we have to understand this whole painterly, like, you know, what is painterly? Why is it considered painterly? So we got to understand that whole kind of vision, that language, and to achieve that painterly look, we gotta go about it by trial and error, you know. So it's something that I really find useful to do, especially if we're trying to go for a certain rendering style. I look at a lot of classical artists as well, like Zorn, you know, Mead Schaefer, and all these other guys that I'm name dropping. And you guys are probably wondering, like, who the hell are these guys? Some of you guys probably already know, probably know more than I do. But for those of you who are new to classical artists, these guys were basically kind of your 19th, 20th century American artists that kind of revolutionized a lot of this stuff. Now, that's not dating back when, like, you know, Michelangelo and all these guys started painting, or like Bernhard and or Rembrandt and stuff like those guys really took it to a whole new level. But everything kind of all has, you know, it's all connected, and it's really nice to kind of go back and see what those guys did, you know, just to kind of cross-reference. And it was one of those things, like, even back in school, I really never appreciated. I was like, man, I'd fall asleep all the time during history class. Like, this stuff is super boring. But seeing how it applies to today's concept art and how we can actually learn from it, it starts to become very, very applicable. You start to find a lot of value in, you know, what was done back then, even design and all that stuff, you know. So it's something to really, you know, I'm definitely looking at it with a new appreciation. Okay, so I think this is a pretty good start. You know, obviously we can go and refine it more and more and stuff like that, but I think I want to spend that energy and time doing that on our actual illustration. But I just wanted to show you guys, you know, just some simple approaches on this kind of paintings. We're going to be translating and doing the same thing with our illustration here today on this whole Dragon Girls series, or I guess some sort of dragon warrior slayer thing. But yeah, let's go ahead and get started. Again, anytime you guys have any questions, you know, do not be a stranger. You know, I know you guys are probably watching this at home, you know, at the comfort of your own home. You know, drop me an email, you know, and let me know if this was useful or not, or what else you guys would like to see. And I guess we'll get started on the next part of the demo. And just finish this little thing. But yeah, let's just check it out. 1, 2, 3, boom, magic, right? Just kidding. But yeah, let's go ahead and get started, and we'll go from there. Alright, so second part of the illustration here. I guess before we start with the overall painting, you know, we should figure out just some basic drawing. And I'm thinking it might be cool to have, you know, kind of the same concept of the girl and the dragon or something. So I'm gonna sketch in as best as I can, just kind of the general pose of what I'm thinking here, and maybe just some, some basic structures of things, like architecture, if there's anything like that we're thinking about. I guess one thing is, you know, you guys may be wondering, like, oh, what do you do when it comes to, you know, like referencing? Like, do I use reference? You know, is reference allowed for stuff like this? And the question to that is absolutely, because our goal here is to basically get, you know, this image to work, but most importantly, you know, we want to do whatever we can to accomplish, you know, the look and feel of that. So this part always is like the trickiest part for me, because I always want to make sure that the visual or the idea looks cool. So I'm thinking about having kind of the figure here. And I don't know if I want to go with the same kind of concept. Maybe it can be the same girl. That's kind of what I've previously illustrated. But I always start off with kind of the overall just face kind of looking out this way, and then kind of her dress. Now the dress, I definitely want it to be kind of a longer sort of type of clothing. Maybe we can even play with kind of the arrangement of the dresses. And remember how we were marking down some of the you know, the studies and just kind of understanding the simplification of it too. We effectively can do the same thing with our drawing, but at this phase, it's just kind of like, you notice how rough I'm being with it. I just want to try to get an idea down. And I guess this is the part that I would say, if you guys are going to spend any time, you know, spend the most amount of time at this phase. You know, really try to figure out what this is going to look like for you guys. Because if this doesn't look good, then I can almost guarantee you that you're not going to be happy with the final. So I always try to make sure that this part of the drawing looks decent. So once we get her positioning in, and I don't know if she's like holding like this huge Bushido blade kind of deal. It might be kind of neat. But maybe the idea of a dragon here, or a Komodo dragon or something. And a lot of times, like, you know, when I actually get to this phase of the drawing, I will highly reference some dragon proportions here, especially like lizards and stuff. So let's go ahead and open up Google here. Google Komodo Komodo dragon. You guys will see this. This is a very common thing with all of my demos, is being yeah, just having issues drawing or issues spelling. So this is actually pretty cool. This is a pretty interesting pose here, and I'm just gonna look for different types of. So just trying to look for some cool poses that we can just kind of reference, and even if you really need to, maybe even get into, you know, just plug into the actual drawing or painting. But yeah, this is actually pretty good. Komodo dragons are so cool. There's like so many interesting kind of forms, and there's like an elegance to kind of how they just look. They're super majestic looking. Let's see here. I think I had one reference picked out. Here we go. This is the one. Okay. So I'm probably gonna do a combination of the two, and mainly here for me, it's really getting the anatomy of this right, because I haven't really drawn too many Komodo dragons. So, you know, we definitely want to try to make sure that this stuff is fairly correct looking before we start committing to the actual painting. And we got kind of this nice face here, which I really like. You'll see me do this a lot, which is basically cobbling together. I'll actually cobble together a lot of pieces, you know, for the painting, and it's something that, you know, it's something that I found that, you know, when I started out, I was like, man, maybe this is like a weird thing to do. It's kind of, maybe it's like a, you know, it has a bad precedent. You know, maybe we should draw everything from scratch. But you know what? It's use whatever method and technique you can in order to complete the drawing. I think that's kind of the thing that I came to terms with is, you know, if you need to use 3D, use 3D. If you need to use 2D underlay tracing paper, use that as well. In order to just get a good drawing. I think that's the most important thing. In order to get exactly what you need as a good fundamental base is probably going to be the most important thing, more important than the actual act of the painting itself, because the painting is just kind of the, you know, the after product, but setting everything up is very important. So you'll see me here just kind of, you know, copying this just because, one, it's probably going to look better than what I can just come up with at the top of my head. Unless I've done tons of drawing of the Komodo dragon, then I will try to do this from memory. But just to kind of get things started, I'll definitely do this here, make some altering changes maybe to this here, maybe make it a little bit, make this guy a little bit bigger. So I'll probably make the eye smaller. By making the eyes and some of the features smaller, it instantly makes the animal or creature look a lot bigger. Okay, so there we go. We have kind of the base of our drawing, right? Let's see here. And then maybe just some sort of a little bit of perspective on the ground, and the background, for the most part, I'm just gonna leave it fairly vague. But if we want to add some architecture, like a cathedral or church or something like that, maybe we can do that. Cathedral, awesome spelling. Interior, let's look at some interior archways. I'm looking at something as very simple as kind of like a hallway or a corridor. This is gorgeous. This would be pretty awesome to have. Maybe we can add that into our painting. Maybe even a section of this, you know, even with that lighting, might be really unique. And the way I like to do this is, you know, I don't want this to basically take up, you know, the bulk of the painting, but, you know, maybe somehow let it be an aid to our composition. So just looking at it, seeing where I can utilize this layout here, I'll just draw what I need from it. And maybe it might be best to have, yeah, that pillar's kind of cool. You do that. And all the stuff back here, we're just going to simplify the visual look and feel of it. And a lot of times I actually play with, you know, a lot of photos to get kind of these nice compositions. And if you guys are wondering, like, oh, how do you come up with different compositional arrangements? You know, I actually just look at a lot of classical paintings and artists, and I just kind of see the way they try to frame everything. And if you see the way they frame their work, it has a fairly, you know, the subject matter is, you know, tends to be in the center, or it tends to be kind of the main visual, and everything is very much composed around it, you know, framing the character and all about, you know, and all the elements of it. And we started with this little horizon line, but we're gonna take that out now. All right, so we'll keep this here as a background. We might even pull elements from it, but we'll start with this, and we'll basically get this going. And I'm going to keep all of my reference, even my little photo bits here, because I want to make sure I can use some of these textures when I need to, and stuff like that. Let's see if there's any interesting bits of reference here. I definitely like the feel of this type of complexity in clothing, so I'll keep that in mind when I do my wardrobe or my drapes. But for the most part, this is a good enough start here, and let's go ahead and just kind of block things out using value, so we can have separation of things. Okay, so starting with the Komodo dragon, I'm gonna just use a darker value, and like our painting, like our little exercise that we did earlier, you just want to block out the silhouette. Okay, so the drawing, the thing that's really good about the drawing is that it helps us visualize the silhouette much easier than it would to just kind of come up with the silhouette. Now there's instances where, you know, a lot of designs are generated through silhouette, but in this case, since we started with the drawing to get some of the ideas across, because we need to see some details and information, we started with the drawing, and to do the painting, we're going to block it out in silhouette. Okay, it's really simple here. Okay, got that. Komodo dragon. Alright, now let's do the character. I'm gonna maybe do a slightly darker value so I can see the character. And at this phase, it's always nice to kind of see the shapes. And when I say shapes, it's like the shape of our character versus the shape of the Komodo dragon. And just to see anything that we want to edit out, you know, we can start making those choices and those decisions like right here. In the line drawing, guys, I'm going to most likely keep the line drawing as just a reference point, but not as the final painting, only because I want to make sure that the drawing is only used to help guide the painting. So you notice how I adjusted the knife or the sword, because the shapes look a lot more better interacting this way than it would if it was just kind of in the tail here. There's some other things that I like to adjust, is kind of like the tail of this guy. Maybe just some of the things here. And at this point, I'm not really worried about the lighting just yet. I want to start worrying about the lighting when we get to that point. For now, it's just about kind of the clarity of the information. And I think that's a pretty good start from here. Okay, now here comes the painting. What I like to do is I'm going to open up my folder of textures, and this is something that I will be sharing with you guys. And this folder of textures has a lot of nice little bits. Now, I do not have the rights to these, meaning I do not own them. However, I will be using them in an abstract way. This is something that I would say, feel free to create your own if you want to use it just directly into, your paintings without any smudging or changing of the actual image. But this is basically, I use it as a way to kind of generate color and just to get some textures in, because it's always nice to have some color in here before you start a painting. So starting with just these colors, it gives me a lot of wiggle room and also just some ideas on how I can place the overall scene, whether I want it more of a cooler value or more red with pockets of light, or if I want it more neutral warm, or very warm. So I'm going to give all of these a shot, but most importantly, I'm going to try to put it in here as a wash, and then basically use that as a starting point. Like, this actually works pretty well already. It's like done, you know what I mean? Don't do anything. But this already works well in the sense that I'm able to kind of adopt a lot of these colors and just kind of get going. And so with even this in mind, I can probably use this and start to kind of obliterate any of these details. Let's keep this on a separate, so you guys have that. And I'm going to think about my lighting here, and I probably want to go with this kind of lighting. It's really nice, so I'll probably go a lot darker in the background here. So this actually works out really well that we went a lot darker there. And I'm going to use a fairly broad brush here just to kind of kill and soften some of that detail. Now I'm going to go very bright here, which means that we're probably going to get very saturated at the transition point here, right around here. Probably going to add a lot more saturation and color. Over here is where we're going to get quite blue and cool. So you see me kind of knocking that back. But here is where we're going to add a lot of color. There's going to be a lot of actually color bounce as well that we're probably going to get. Let's create a new layer for that. In the background, guys, remember how as we discussed before in our lecture in the beginning of the video, is anything that is relatively out of focus is going to be considered vague. Anything that's vague is going to be a large brushstroke, and I don't want to fuss with too much detail because it's just kind of out of our focal range. So I'm not going to really care too much about trying to get the exactness of what's going on here. I just want to get kind of the impression of color and light and architecture that might be happening in the distance. And I'm just color picking here. But now here, as I mentioned before, we want to get brighter and probably more saturated. So I'm going to use this as a base. I'm actually going to smudge a lot of this detail here, just to get some nice mix of color, and also just kind of pop some of that, just kind of getting that sense of light here. We got really lucky with that photo. I totally lucked out. I was like, oh man, that's like easy. I don't have to do anything. Just got lucky. And you know, sometimes a lot of that stuff, you know, lighting is sometimes actually gets, you know, it helps us in the sense that, like, you know, when we look at an image or a photograph, we get a lot of ideas. And so I feel that I got lucky in the sense that you know, that was like a happy accident for us. Okay, let's get some more worms right up in here. And the background, I'm actually going to darken to get kind of this nice contrast here. I'm just kind of testing it out, because as soon as we do this, then we notice that the lighting scenario changes, where we start to look at this being lit and the background being dark. So that's something that I definitely want to test out here and see how that looks and feels. Add just a little splash of color, just so that it's not completely, you know, blown out back here, so it's not completely lost, I guess. It's interesting how you can actually start to determine a lot of color choices just by kind of marking it down using your large brush here. Now there's something nice about this, only in the sense that it gives us such nice contrast between the figure in the background. I think that's the only reason why it's working so well. So I'm going to try this as a version and this as another version, just to kind of keep. But you notice how even keeping something like this, we see a lot of, we see an image already that's you know, somewhat working. You know, you can almost already imagine how this would all come together. You turn that off and you can kind of see all the colors kind of working somewhat. Alright. And again, the only reason why I'm trying to keep a lot of this stuff where I'm fussing with a lot of the background here is because there's not going to be much more added detail. You know, it's just going to be more blips of color and stuff like that. So I definitely want to try to resolve just my overall color sense here at this phase before getting into the detail. It's just like figuring out kind of the overall local color of the object, you know. So these are all just like really broad choices that I'm just kind of playing with before we get into the actual figure. Just a little bit of blue here. The only reason why I'm adding blue here is because I want to really play up that shadow here and let it feel a lot cooler. Just adding more bits of color back here. But I definitely want to still keep it fairly nice and loose, because we want most of our color to happen here towards the our foreground here. Always turn off the drawing and see how it feels. Okay. Now let's color this person. Duplicate these so you guys have these as kind of different stages so you can see the before and after. And I'm just gonna go ahead and start painting in. Now I'm imagining that the local color for this character is gonna be, you know, I kind of want it to be this warmer palette. I think it has a nice feel, and also just kind of play with kind of the overall lighting scenario and make it all kind of feel harmonized. And her hair can be kind of this darker value as well. Again, I'm gonna play with the colors that I have here in the scene and come up with variations within that. It makes for a much more easier way to kind of compose the image and not get too, I guess, not get too caught up with like dealing with like, you know, 100,000 different colors, but just kind of playing with what you have here, or using what you have. Maybe she has like some sort of really beautiful kind of necklace or something, some sort of jewelry that represents royalty or something like that. But she's a badass because she has a sword that's basically is half the size of her body. Again, remember what we talked about is, you know, just establishing kind of the local color. So that's what I want to do here, is just kind of establish the local colors here of this character, or of even like the Komodo dragon. Now I'm adding a little bit of purple here just to kind of offset it a little bit to see. Like, I definitely want a darker value here, but I don't want just all warms, but maybe something to kind of help give it a nice neutral or a different value here, color. You know, if you guys already have your colors picked out by photo, then you can completely use that as well. And a lot of times you'll actually see me even doing this, where I'll actually overlay the dominant color just to kind of get everything kind of harmonizing. And I use overlay a lot to kind of get things tinted, and it tints things in a way where, you know, we can start to imagine and see a lot of nice colors coming together. So I'll definitely kind of keep this in mind, so that way we can tint it. But for now, let's just get some of these basic colors in. This is looking a little brown to me, so let's just change it up. Brown dragon, brown pillar, brown everything. No, but this is something that, again, just thinking about harmony, color harmony, and just the overall color of the scene, something that I'm just trying to establish here. And again, I am working, since we have kind of the general local color here, and a lot of these local colors, you know, we can start to make those modifications if we need to, but a lot of this local colors here, I'm going to start to just put in some of the general shadow, and I still want to go based off of this kind of lighting where there's a strong sense of light here, so I'm going to put where I think is the shadow, and we can even use a reference here, right, to kind of think about where the shadow might fall, and start painting that information. Okay. I have this thing called the pattern stamp tool. So the pattern stamp tool gives me a lot of nice textures. So again, remember that that little texture sheet that I brought in? All these little awesome textures here. I can actually go to edit and define pattern, and what this gives me, guys, is it gives me the ability to actually paint with the patterns instead of having to plug it in. Now we can do one. We can either do one or the other, where we have the pattern here, and we start to plug it into our character and start defining some nice textures and stuff like that. We can do that, or we can actually paint with it by actually going here underneath the clone stamp tool is a pattern stamp tool, and this is where I can actually paint with those textures. and you'll see here what we get. We get a lot of craziness here, but this immediately gives us a lot of great color, and just thinks about, we can start to think about kind of the way we can use a lot of these colors immediately. And we can put on impressionist mode where we can get a lot of nice combination of the colors here. But this is something that I always try to use sparingly, so it doesn't get so crazy in the beginning. This even works too. You'll see me actually use a lot of the textures here, just to kind of get things going. So I'm going to go back and forth on this and try to find something that works for us. And I created a bunch of little patterns here. And I definitely try this out, guys. It's really cool, nifty trick. Let me put a little darker pattern here. And these are all patterns that I've created and collected over the years. So it's not anything like super specific or special. They're just patterns of like cement, rocks and stuff like that. But it definitely gives me a nice little range of textures that I can use, and without having to go on Google all the time. You get a lot of nice range of colors just like that I can immediately use. Again, I just want to think about her shadow and how that's going to look. And shadow this value here. Always constantly testing to see what value I want to use here. But again, the shadows is something that we're only going to use to help describe just some major folds, stuff like that. Just thinking about our previous little exercise here and where we can utilize some of those things that we learned. Maybe in just some of those shadow patterns here. Like, these are some of the things that I really want to kind of cross-reference and understand. Maybe there is a nice little fold here. And if that's the case, then we probably can't have a lot of these shapes, these shadow shapes, because again, the shadow is going to almost determine and describe just kind of the way that the clothing is going to behave. maybe just some sort of like indication of the hand and the wrist guard. And again, you'll notice that I'm not playing with any highlights. I'm just playing with all the mid to dark tones here. Because the highlights I definitely want to save. And again, just kind of constantly looking at the silhouette of our character here. Maybe it might be better to have her arm, you know, out. So I think I had her hand originally come down here, but I think it's only confusing the readability of it. So having her hand come out up here, I think allows for just an easier graphic read. And maybe she's like pointing or something, like commanding the dragon. It's like, go there. Again, these dark creases are always something that we want to be selective about, like especially where we put it, because again, it can get way too just busy. So you'll notice how I'm just kind of simplifying some of this stuff. It's not to say that we're not going to have creases, but these dark little dimples here of where the creases are is something that I want to be selective about. And try to keep in mind, you know, where our what our form is doing. And again, all this detail down here, I'm going to get really just simple, large brush. It's further down, right? So you know, if you guys want like this kind of vibe or this type of like what kind of reference would be good for this type of stuff is like William Waterhouse. Excellent. Just has amazing storytelling, and just like it's just gorgeous. Every shot and painting that he has has a beautiful representation. Again, just using my little pattern stamp tool here just to get more color in the trimming of her clothing. Okay, from here, I think I'm going to start doing some of the midtones, or the gradations here. Oh, actually, yeah, of the actual clothing. So I'm going to create another new layer and put that on darken, and put soft brush. And eventually, you know, when you guys start to paint more and get more comfortable with what you're putting down, you know, you don't have to do this as much where it's really processed. Like what I'm showing you guys right now, it's highly processed, and it's not the way to paint all the time. But I'm just showing you guys so that there is a, you know, nice step-by-step that you can follow. So don't feel obligated that, you know, you have to paint this way. If you want to just kind of be a little bit more intuitive and feel it out, then you may do so, you know. There's no right or wrong, especially with painting. Just as long as what you're trying to communicate is very clear, because that's the only thing that you got to just keep in mind. Okay, so that's not too bad. Looking at that, most likely going to collapse this, so I'll save it out. Now I still have this on a separate layer because I'm probably going to use that as an adjustment and start painting with it, but for now let's continue with the drawing and painting. Better mark on the hand there. And just start to kind of clean a little bit of the silhouette here. This is where we have to really start to be very, very simple but specific. Simple in the sense that it has to not be too overworked, but specific in the sense that it has to convey all the right details. So this part, I always find, you know, I always mess up on this part. So as a way to kind of problem solve this, because again, you know, as I'm showing you guys this demo, this is not, you know, this is not anything that's like incredibly like pre-prepped or anything like that. This is just raw, right? So as I mess up, you guys get to see, you know, how I'm resolving this stuff. The challenge that I feel that I'm facing here is, you know, really trying to get the anatomy of the face to work in conjunction with the lighting and all that stuff. So it's definitely a struggle here to get this to all feel like it wants to come together. So this is where we can start to kind of go back to our reference and see if there's anything that we can borrow or look at. Like, that's a nice face here that I can just kind of have. And also, another nice point of view would be if we look up medieval cosplay or something. Now, there's a lot of nice kind of photography that we can look at, but like maybe princesses and stuff like that, there's always like elegant poses that they always shoot them in, and I probably want that side profile kind of look. Like, that's really nice, something really simple, that kind of side profile look. That's not bad either, but probably a little too. That's probably a little too looking up for me. Let's see if there's any larger images here. Oh, this is weird. Now we just got into more Disney princesses here. That's nice too. Something more simple and elegant like that is something what I'm going for. Even a side profile like that is nice. But having this allows me to kind of look at the general proportion and also see what I can do to kind of get that foreshortening of the face, but still maintaining kind of the major features here. So I know a lot of you guys might be like, "Whoa, why don't you just photo bash it and just put it in?" I can do that, but it takes an equal amount of time because I have to end up still cleaning it up. But if I want to get some sense of basic, positioning of the face or anything like that to help, I can do that as well. But for the most part, it's just might as well just kind of use the reference and just kind of see what we can do to kind of get it to read like the photograph. The colors here are mostly inaccurate, just only because of the lighting scheme. So I'm just gonna bump up the colors a little bit, but I don't want to reference the color too much, because again, the color of this character versus what's here is completely different. So, but I just want to pay attention to kind of the way the character, the face and positioning, how it looks. So to me, it feels more accurate to have kind of this type of representation, where she's kind of 3/4 looking away. You see a little bit of the pink or the red pigment in her nose. Start to really refine some of the the shapes of the hair, and get some of those nice darker values here. Just going to put a little highlight here just so I can kind of start thinking about some of the forms, the lighting of this character, but I still really need that. I still really need this to read. And right now it's kind of like, okay, what do I do to get this to read better? Maybe we need to add more shadow value or something. I always color pick from the photograph here, just to see if I can kind of borrow or use what's there that kind of help with my photo here, or my painting. And again, it's almost strategic that it's like, hey, yeah, let's just only show a part of her face, mainly because, you know, it's like drawing a whole face for me is like incredibly hard, you know, but let's just go with that. But I've always kind of liked this type of you know, the way the face looks when it's slightly turned. It just has more of a suggestive feel. I don't know if that's something that, you know, we want, and we can always change the painting, but as a general start, you know, it's not too bad. Maybe some sort of crown or something. And maybe some jewels, you know, like some embellishing kind of like jewelry and things that this character would actually wear. And a lot of this stuff here, we can start to soften and color pick, just kind of get a nice kind of range there. Again, just get a little bit of shadow right where her chest is. Okay. And then, so I'm going to do something here real quick. Definitely want to simplify the ground a little bit more. But it's going to help me to just kind of think about this a bit more graphically. I know, you know, we said a lot of the colors and values here earlier on, but I think I just want to simplify what I'm looking at, just so that it's easier to kind of approach the painting. So this constant back and forth. Like you'll always find like one area of your painting working and another area still unresolved, and it's just that constant back and forth battle. So this is what I really wanted to kind of get, is this feeling of like gradation, like the ground having a little bit of perspective, and just kind of getting a sense of that, and maybe just some breakup of light and shadow over here in the distance. Okay, there's one area that I'm not too keen on, and that is basically the arm. The arm is something that's really bugging me, so I think I'm gonna use the opportunity here to look at some of these photographs, and even look at maybe some Renaissance photos here of some women with drapery and stuff like that. This is actually really cool. But just to get some forms and drapes, it's just actually looking really simple in my opinion. So I definitely want to adopt and see if there's anything that I can find as a source of inspiration, but also just texture. I really want to try to get some of that texture. That's a pretty cool face too. This is where it's just constant referencing just to find that right look and feel. And Renaissance clothing is awesome. Just the amount of different type of characters and stuff like that. It's always really neat to see. At least the ones that are tastefully done. You know, there's like some really nice, like weird, scandalous looking images. There might be some really nice ones here. So let's go ahead and check. That's awesome. Some nice like folds and things like that. That could really be really useful. So what I'm actually looking for is something where the character actually has a long sleeve. Kind of like that. This is actually pretty appropriate here. And trying to get that to fit into what I have. So I'm actually going to literally use this. to kind of get that feeling of, you know, it's draping properly and whatnot. So I'm just gonna put that in here, and let's go ahead and colorize this guy. Now I'll oftentimes actually do this to kind of ensure that my painting, or at least the elements of my painting, are somewhat believable, especially the folds. I mean, folds, clothing, and stuff like that is definitely a tricky thing, and I want to make sure that I can get that look by just adopting the photo here. Because right now, notice it's very, very straight, and that's the one thing that I don't really like about the way I painted the forms here. It's actually looking and slacking really straight. So I might even pull this back just so the arm can somewhat rest a bit. Because it looks like it's kind of bending. It just visually looks a lot more natural if the arm is resting down. Now these folds feel better. The shape feels better, and also just kind of the overall feeling of what it's doing feels a lot more natural, because this hard edge right here wasn't quite working. I think this just has a more natural feel of what's going on with the arm. And behind it, obviously we can indicate that it's, you know, darker. I'm even gonna use a lot of the folds here. This is like, why not? This is gold, man. Just get that nice impression, and then from here I probably want to just sample bits of it to see where I can actually get that to work, because I don't want to obliterate everything that I just did, but because otherwise we should have just done that from the get-go, right? But probably sample just bits of it here and just kind of see where it works for us versus where it doesn't. And it's going to be this constant like back and forth, like, and you'll also notice that I actually compress my image down just to simplify the layer. get kind of the crease on the chest here. Maybe even lighten it up just a little bit. Constant back and forth. I think one of the hardest things about painting is, like, you know, we're always afraid to make mistakes, right? And the thing is like, every artist that I know, including myself, we're bound to make mistakes. It's just how we stick with those mistakes and how we try to figure it out. Because even as I'm doing this demo, I'm like totally messing up, you know. And you guys are probably wondering, like, dude, this is supposed to be like, you know, isn't this supposed to be like perfectly figured out? It's like, no, actually, I don't even know most of the time, like, where I'm going with my paintings. I have a theory. I have general rules that I've stuck with for quite some time, but in terms of like exactly how it's going to end up, I mean, even for me, it's a trial and error. So, you know, I'm actually very, very nervous when I even do demos like this, because it's one, it's live, and two, it's like making sure that, you know, it can get resolved just at the end of it. It's like, you know, can I resolve this? And, you know, what does it take? Like, what are some of the things that we need to be mindful of as we're trying to resolve an image like this? Okay, not to ignore the Komodo dragon, but it is something that we're gonna have to try to resolve at some point. Now, I probably want to. The face isn't something that I'm like completely sold on, so I'm just gonna try something by photo bashing, and just to get a different face here, because I don't like kind of the way mine ended up. So I'm just gonna try to fill this one in, and I do this by actually lowering the opacity, doing a light erase, and then filling it in, copy merging it down, and actually darkening it and using the values here to then paint. The reason why I tend to do this is because, one, it's like painting female faces for me is always really tricky, and two, I'm going to use whatever technique I can to get kind of my image to work, but more importantly to kind of set me up so I can actually do this nice painterly image. I know that you know, we used a lot of, you know, we did a lot of, you know, practices and stuff like that, but, you know, those are just to kind of to get us warmed up. Now, everyone, you guys, we're gonna have a lot of different I guess different results, mainly due to, you know, some of us being more experienced drawing the figure and painting faces and stuff like that. I tend to lack that area just because I haven't done it as much, but as a way to kind of resolve or try to still do these types of illustrations with not having that much foundation in it is, one, I can practice, right? As we all know, we can just continue to practice to do better, or to get that knowledge down, or we do lots of photo referencing and really try to figure out what's going to work and try to get that in to our painting by studying it, understanding it, and then applying it. Because the goal is to still do a painterly based image. Let me just undo that real quick. So we have this separate. Now you guys are probably wondering, like, why not just apply this in Paint? Well, I want the option to be able to paint this at the end and kind of do it accordingly, if I want it or not. So that way I don't feel like, you know, we're stuck with the red. Now that we have this here, and start to simplify some of the elements of the face here. And even add, you know, paint on top. Now again, I still haven't done the highlight pass, which I'm still going to save to the end, and that's trying to bring everything together. The reason being is because the highlight pass will determine kind of the direction of light, but most importantly, the intensity of light. And just this decor, I really want to try to, you know, get a little bit more of this like really beautiful decor. The feminine side of me is like totally comes out during this time. I'm like, oh my goodness, it has to be so pretty. Hello, decor. I recently saw this movie, The Woman in Gold, and it was about Klimt, the German or Austrian painter, but it was during kind of the during the Holocaust times, and there was just like a small little snippet of Klimt doing the illustration of one of the family members, and it was just like so beautiful, man. Just the amount of colors. And just the way it looks is just gorgeous, you know? I know you guys are wondering, like, whoa, we're spending a lot of time just on the character. I am spending a lot of time here, but you know, it'll give us a better idea of how to kind of handle the rest of the painting. And this is where it's just kind of, the process will kind of start and stop, start and stop. So meaning, like, you know, we will establish a lot of the shadow values, but also I'll kind of periodically stop to just kind of see how the painting is just going. You know, because for me, there's a lot of things that I'm really trying to figure out, which is like color, you know, some design bits. As when we're doing the quick study, some of those things are not present. You know, we don't have to really think about that stuff or stress about it. Just want to get kind of the shapes in her hair to look nice. Probably get some of that nice pink tone right up here, and that pink tone to come across on her character's hand, and down here as well. But notice how, like, this is, the face is already our focal point, because I spent so much time, but also two, the amount of small detail, right? It's gotten very specific, the details. Okay, cool. Now, a lot of this stuff down here, I'll eventually probably want to kill a lot of the details and edges here, you know. But for now, let's keep it as is, just so that we can start to make those choices, you know, as we start to edit it down. But you know, this is kind of a preview of what I'll be doing, just softening the edges here, getting some of those details to get more simplified, to read. Just a more simple manner. And simplify some of the brush strokes as well. Okay, now we've totally neglected the dragon. I mean, holy shit, the whole time we're painting the character and we're like, what about the dragon, man? Oh shit, sorry dragon. Well, let's try to get some of those forms in. Now, because the dragon is kind of a secondary background read, I probably don't want to get too detailed with it. You know, I just kind of want a nice feel of the form of the dragon. Start kind of getting some lost edges. Lost edges as in we're gonna get a lot of loose edges here, just because the dragon, if we have it too sharp cutout here, too sharp of a cutout, it'll be very, very difficult for us to read, you know, the forms. So this is something that I'm gonna do just to kind of get some nice lost edges. As we turn that off, we can start to kind of see, you know, how this all kind of plays into it. Like I probably want to simplify this form here, just again, so there's no competing elements. Maybe indicate the leg here. Might just go ahead and even use a soft brush to kind of dial down a lot of the lighting here. Just give it a nice gradation so we can really see what's going on here. Now again, I want to go very, very broad strokes. The dragon here. So we can get some nice lost kind of edging here. Now something that we can start to think about or do is basically copy merge the entire thing and then apply this. This is what I want to start doing now, is apply the overlay and then really start getting those colors to work. I'm gonna apply this and then compress it down so I can just focus purely on the illustration now. I still have these masked out, which is great, so I can just kind of always periodically go and mask them. But now I have this, is I can just start to worry just about the image as a whole rather than in segments, because that's kind of what was happening, was everything was starting to become segmented in the sense that, you know, all the values were just, you know, being worked on independently as opposed to holistically, you know, or as a whole image together. And that's something that I wanted to do initially, but then you see kind of like the image in the painting looks so incomplete when we do that. But at least now when we do this, it allows for us to just work on the shot or the image as a whole. Now I'm probably going to add some nice shadows here coming from the sword, also the back of our character here. Some nice deep darker shadows. Now I probably can benefit from having some sort of texture on the floor, so maybe we can use like Renaissance rug or something. Oh, too many G's. Or carpet or stuff like this. This is like just for me to get some patterning on the floor, and also it just helps to kind of break up the flooring. And it just kind of gives it a nice sense of perspective into the distance here. And we could put that on overlay, or we could put it on soft light, or even multiply, whatever kind of works. Or shoot, maybe we just keep it on normal. I just want to kind of just indicate it ever so slightly into the image. Just so that we have something here. I don't want to lose that light, so probably gonna erase just a little bit out of it. And it's okay to kind of keep it this kind of opaque feel. I'm actually okay with it kind of being lost a little bit, because the painting is not about all the details. It's always about the mood that we're trying to create. So that's kind of the goal here. So once I got that, now we can just continue to focus on the mood of this painting. Make a selection on the dragon itself. Start adding a little bit of lighter tones, just to kind of bring it, lift it up a little bit. Again, large brush strokes for details that are not focused. Just going to kill some of this detail here, because I don't think it's actually important to have all the textures of the rug. Remember how we had this image here too? This is something that I might just bring in ever so slightly, like some of the architectural pillars, stuff like that, just to help enhance some of the elements in our painting. So maybe here I can add just to even put it on soft light. It gives it kind of a nice texture or undertone. And this is where now we're starting to get into a little bit of some of that lighting that we got. Maybe put this one on lighten. As a way to just kind of get a little bit of color in there. Might saturate just a tad bit and make it even more. Maybe even this one here can be saturated a tad bit. And brighter. And then create a It's funny, right? Like, you guys are watching this like, what the hell? It went from kind of going traditionally, now we're photo bashing, or we're using all these like digital techniques to kind of get a traditional look. You know, why not just paint it traditionally? Well, that's the thing, is that, like, you know, in Photoshop, use whatever tools necessary to kind of achieve the look. And for me, a lot of it's always kind of a hybrid between you know, using traditional looking brushes and implementing it into our painting, and then editing, because a lot of the editing process is actually what's going to you know, kind of the bulk of the work is to kind of get that to read. So for me, it's always been that's always been the battle. And that's kind of been my strategy to actually, you know, achieve this kind of look. I would actually probably struggle more if I were to do this just pure traditionally, because then, you know, it's like using only the basic rules of painting, and not being allowed to use anything else. So I don't want to limit myself. I mean, it's in a way, like, it's just the way I work, you know. This is, a lot of this stuff is, you know, it should always be taken with a grain of salt, because this is just kind of my process. It's not the way to paint. And as I mentioned before, you know, a lot of artists out there have such great foundation in terms of painting traditionally, that, you know, that what they can bring to the table might be very unique, you know. And it might be very unique to their sensibilities, and also to their way of painting and making awesome awesome images. You know, this is just one of my methods. So I'm trying to get some of that texture in there. Create a mask. and then I'm going to use this silhouette to unveil some of that texture. And I'm going to only do it just in the areas that I need, because again, don't want to go too overboard, and also you don't want to kill the sketch feel, the feeling of this sketchy feel that we have here, to lose all that. So that's the way to kind of like emulate that feeling or that vibe. Alright, now let's light it. It's like we've done all this work, now it's kind of like, alright, what do we do next? Now let's light it. A couple of things I like to do when lighting is, like, you know, here's kind of the traditional method of like, hey guys, if you want to learn how to light, this is how you do it. Duplicate it and, you know, put it on screen, and you can do this, and you can start to reveal some of the stuff that you want to show, face and all that stuff, you know. That's one way of doing it, and the other way of doing it is actually just painting, but I'm going to show you guys a combination of both. So what we're going to do here is duplicate it, lighten the value, I'm going to desaturate it, and I'm actually going to put on screen, okay, and I'm going to put a mask on top, and I'm going to use this as a base. And this always helps to kind of get a feeling of, you know, how do we want light to kind of work on this image, because light's coming down here, right? So how do we get it to come across, you know, onto the body and still maintain kind of the forms and stuff. So what I'm going to do is just kind of reveal the lighting, and be really, really bold, right? I'm probably going to try to be really graphic with it, maybe light it in this direction. And then from here, then we want to consider all the shadows. So use our broad brush, whichever one to your liking, and then start to simplify some of those forms and really dull it down a bit. Just so that we can retain and get some of those forms back. But this way, you know, it's like we're painting the lighting, but we still have like a safety measure where if we at any time we want to bring something back, we can easily do that. Now the reason why I want to do this method is because it allows me to put on a light source, and then from there start to gauge how I want to light the rest of the body, because a lot of the lighting here it's direct light initially, and then it's going to be very, very much bounce light that we're going to play with. And it's the bounce light that's going to give us kind of that nice, you know, theatrical read that I'm going for. Now it's always nice to kind of be really, really crude with it in the beginning. Crude meaning like just be bold with, you know, the light direction of light. Just say, oh yeah, it's coming from here, and then edit it down. Then we make our edits. This is where we're just refining some of the lighting bits here and some of those shapes. Get some of that shadow in from the hand. Right? We gotta obey the shadow, otherwise a lot of this stuff will feel like it's not consistent. Now, when you look at this image, now you see lights on, lights off, right? And this is kind of what I meant by like, oh, now we get to do the lights. Now from here, it's gonna be a lot of kind of the back and forth where create a layer and I want to give it kind of that sense of bounce light and stuff like that, just to kind of really pop it. The bounce light is great because I can use lighten and actually go back to some of those awesome textures that we had. There's my folder of textures, abstract, and I think we might have put it in here already, right? Some of these little nice bits of color. Here, let's get rid of some of these. Probably don't need. Actually, this is all reference here. So that way you guys know what I used and what I didn't use. I didn't use the Princess Leia looking chick, so we can get rid of that. Reference for face, and this is the practice reference here. Okay, sorry about that. Layer organization, my enemy, son of a bitch. Alright, so one thing is getting some textures in. I'll probably bring in some more of the same abstract bits here like that, or some other ones that I found. Actually, this probably isn't even a texture, this is more of a drawing, but I do like some of the shapes in here. And when I mean shapes, is a lot of the textures, these little squiggly bits, and that's actually really neat because when I see that and I put this on soft light or even on a overlay, you know, whichever one fits, I can start to almost see some interesting patterns, and that's what I really want to use here. Is just I want to kind of bank off of these really abstract patterns and shapes here. Go to my clone stamp. Probably stamp this over. Just to get some more of its textures around the tail and just some areas where I think this can use it. I want to see if I can pull the blacks away. Make a selection of our Komodo dragon and start to just kind of add in some of that Nice warm light. But I want to be really selective again. Too much can kill the image. So I just want to do it in some areas and kind of build it up. Okay, you can already see that it's already getting really overpowered. It's overpowering the image and also a lot of the details and forms. So I don't want to do that, so I'm going to back it off just a bit. I might even kind of smudge out some of the details. There's a lot of frequency of noise here in the actual texture, so you can smudge out some of the darks here. Now the character, I'm going to add texture as well, but just looking at the overall character, I think it can use a little bit more of a more contrast on the upper part of the body. So I'm gonna just make a selection here and put on overlay, or even like soft light or something, just to really punch the silhouette and lighting of the character. So I feel like it's a bit too lit. The character's lit way too lit here. And from here, we notice, like, you know, the character's being too lit. Then how do we get this to read? Well, we just use the light, right? So what I'll do is make a selection of the character, invert it, and I'm going to start unveiling some more light behind the character here, using the Komodo dragon as my light strategy. Just to kind of get that silhouette to read. Okay. Maybe we can even intensify some of the lighting behind her right here, just to kind of really make this a focal point, right? Again, use broad strokes, broad brushes. If we get too specific, just know that it's going to completely kill the image. But notice when I did that, this makes it really contrasty, so I can actually probably lift some of the value range here. Lift and even saturate. Alright, use more textures. At this point now it's just like texture time. It's like, let's just go texture crazy. The colors, man. Get the colors. I realize as I'm doing this, I'm talking to myself on the mic. It's kind of crazy, dude. But, you know, gotta have fun. Alright, so, we'll probably put this on light, not light, sorry, over, put on that, and then I'll just probably just kind of reveal it in the areas where I think it needs a little bit of pizzazz, and that's just kind of the background here. It's a bit boring, to be honest, mainly because one, we don't have much architectural detail, and two, it's just really flat colors, so I just want to give it the impression that there's things kind of happening, even though there's not much really happening. It's just kind of a cathedral architectural kind of motif back there. I want to do the same thing here, even add a little bit of, you know, something to kind of bump this up. And even that gives it a nice textural feel. Okay. Alright, I think we're almost done here. I'm just going to take a quick pass and just do some lost edges, meaning like anything that's totally anything that's way too refined, I'm just going to kind of slightly lose the edge a bit by kind of, you know, blurring it out a little bit here. Just kind of cross-reference some of the forms, make sure I don't lose too much. Just go in here and start to refine and fix. This is where a soft edge would actually come in handy, where instead of it being really crisp here, we can actually get a lot more looser and just have some of the light blend a little bit together. And just even some of the shapes of the hair, maybe it can be a little bit more, slightly more elegant. And then around the face here, I mean, a lot of this stuff is so loose. You see this? It's like pretty loose. I mean, it's not the most detailed rendering, and that's kind of what I love about, you know, doing these painterly the painterly illustrations or techniques, is that it allows paintings to be loose but still be really legible and really nice to look at. And that's kind of what I really wanted to go for. Because when you get too rendered on an image, it gets way too hard to read, and it gets way too overworked really easily. It's like she's like pointing to something. She's like, it's over there. There we go. That's kind of the bounce light that I wanted to create. I know it took us a while to get to this point, but you guys can see kind of how we built up the painting. You know, we started with the image, and it really started to kind of refine the clothing a bit, and then just kind of honed in on the actual painting side of things. And this is the kind of lost edge that we want to play with too. So you can see, like, you know, a lot of the photos here are completely gone now. We don't really have much of the photo left. You know, the photos were just there to kind of aid us to get to this point. Okay, get a little bit of that skylight just on the hand there. A little bit on the face here as well. Otherwise it's going to feel really flat really quickly. But just a tad bit. Might be too much. And even on the hair, you know, we can just color pick from within our range of textures and colors and whatnot to kind of get this. And this is the stuff, like, this is a nice hard edge, but maybe this little crown doesn't have to be. Maybe parts of the hair can actually be looser. You know, as we start to zoom in, there's some areas where I'm like, wow, that's maybe a little too refined of an edge. You know, maybe some stuff we can definitely kill the detail. But there you go. There you have it. I hope you guys enjoyed this demo, and let me know if you guys have any questions. I know this is this might be, you know, something that you guys already know how to do and repeat for a lot of people and new to other people, and so I'd love to see, you know, what you guys thought of this, and I'd love to see what you guys produce. I mean, so if you guys can send me some images, it's always fun to share. And yeah, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.